All right. All right, welcome back. So today's will be our last lecture. All next week and the following will be for mostly for grading. Still be available if you need me. So I think grading will start on Tuesday. Although you're encouraged to keep working on your project, since I might not get to you perhaps towards the end, right? You might. I'm going to start randomly grading from both graduate and undergraduate. There's 150 of you. Someone has to be first. Somebody has to be last. But I will randomly choose. So you should keep. We will send you a text. I'm going to send you a form to fill out. To make sure that I have the URL to your OpenShift, the URL to your GitHub, that I have the URL to your Google Doc, documenting your project, and also a phone number where I can text you. I'll try to text you a couple hours earlier, maybe the night before. I don't know. I can't guarantee that. It's going to be hectic for the next 2 weeks. But you should have the latest on GitHub and OpenShift. So every incremental improvement. Download it. I wouldn't want to get into this texting that says, are you done? Says, wait a minute, it's not working. I just broke it. Wait. So make sure that what's there is stable. Also, like I said earlier in the semester, I don't think I've mentioned this again, but a 5-minute video of you using your project. If you do a Google Hangout like I do, you just start off with Google Hangout, and it'll record. You can record hours. But I'm asking for something 5 minutes, something short. Please, not more than 20 minutes. Last semester, some folks hours rambling on. It was very interesting, but just keep it short. Just you casually using your project. Make sure you to speak out to to all the features and just present your project in your best light. Okay. Also, if you are using APIs, it's not required, but if you are, make sure to mention it in the video. What else? So and then when you're done, just include the URL to that video as part of the form that I'm going to submit over the weekend. Just fill it out. I'll have everything from all students. What else? That's it. Yes.
So, do we need to have security implemented in our project?
So definitely in the project. Definitely in the project, because I need to start grading it. For the assignments, I know it's an issue of having it both, running both. So I'll fix that over the weekend, and I'll send to everybody to fix it.
So like if you get Passport.js running in our project, the assignment, it's like that's all we need to do for the project.
For the
If it's
yeah. So you might need to comment out the assignment so that the project runs. Right? And it works fine online on OpenShift. So hopefully by this weekend, I'll have to fix for you so that you'll be able to have for both. For next week on Friday, because I pushed the due date to next Friday. So you should be by next Friday, you should be able to run both of them. There's no issue. It was early on. We mentioned this when the document went out to the assignments. We mentioned about basically the requirements were the 5 pages, the 2 types of users, and the relationships between users and domain objects. Yeah, admin. Well, two types of users. So the default would be admin, but many people chose something else. But if you think of one, the default would be admin.
And we need an admin.
You don't have to, but it's the easiest thing to do. And yeah, we mentioned about the video early on, but I haven't mentioned it since. But 5-minute video, it's for your benefit. It's a guarantee that I don't skip over anything. That, it's you showing me, hey, don't forget that I did this and that. But if you want to do the video, that's fine. It's for your benefit, right? Yeah, so the form will show you the good things that we've already mentioned. Yes.
Reiterate the issue and next test.
Well, passport local strategy is having an issue being instantiated to be used both for the assignment and the project. And I thought I had found a solution to it. It worked on my little environment, but it's not working for some of the students. So I'm going to look into it so that I have the solution so that everybody can use it. Unique name. Use that name to distinguish between using the local strategy for the project or local strategy for the assignment. And they were colliding, and so that's by naming them, supposedly it was going to fix it, but I guess it didn't. So I'll have that over the weekend for everybody. Okay. All right. So here's a little. It's using EJS, and it's your run-of-the-mill data entry application, very much like the app that we are looking over in Web App Maker. It has the lists of all the entities, and you can add new entities. So it has this one page that lists all the entities, right? There's a dedicated page for you entering new content. I want to go to Island. It was nice and sunny. I do OK, and then you go back to the list, right? So right there's two dedicated pages, right? There's the one that lists all of them. There's one that allows you to enter new instances, and then there's the editing. I can then edit an existing entry. Lots of fish. And you go back to the list. So basically, there's three dedicated pages, right? One listing, one for editing a particular entity, and one for entering new instances. Yes. And obviously, you have the various CRUD operations: list all, find one, create. And so you might think that if I need to create a whole bunch of these, right, of these pages, I would like to maybe copy and paste a lot of this, right? It turns out that once you've done lots of web applications, you start finding patterns, right? You start finding that, oh, it's almost always the same thing, right? I need something that allows me to list all these things, the one that allows me to edit, one that allows me to enter data. And they are somewhat related to one another, right? You start finding these design patterns. If you try to generalize a little bit that idea, if we try to generalize that idea, you would come up with something like this generic pattern, right? That for every single entity. For any single entity, right? If you design this as a UML diagram, right? If you have an entity implemented as a class or implemented as a table, right, in a database, you're going to have 3 dedicated pages, right, that work together, right? One that does a list, one that does to be able to create new ones, and one for editing, right? And they all work together, right? It allows you to list all of them. One allows you to add, right? And once you've added, it comes back to the list. Or if you try to edit, you go to an edit page, you update the elements, and then you go back to the to the lists, right? Okay, so it's a design pattern that you start finding, identifying. Also, another design pattern is based on the attributes, on the fields of your UML diagram, right? Of your class diagram, right? So the name, the only thing that makes this unique, this particular entity, is the name of the entity, the properties of that entity, and then the data types of those entities, right? That's what makes this particularly unique. The pages basically behave the same way. It just changes from one to the other, depending on the description of your particular class diagram, right? So if you have here an entity that represents a trip, a fishing trip, you might have the name of the trip that you named it, the description that what you did. But if you want to create, say, another entity, maybe a fish, because I caught a fish, I might have, again, 3. One for listing all the fish that I caught, right? One for entering a brand new fish that the weight, the length, things like that, right? The water temperature, or if I'm a sport fisherman, I like to catch all sorts of statistics about having caught that particular fish. Which you would implement something similar, but for fish, right? So be able to create new ones, being able to edit an existing one, right, and then return it to this. So you might find yourself copying and pasting, and having this over and over. Or you could become a kind of like a meta programmer. Ideally, what you'd be able to do is point an application, right, to this description of the schema, right? Ideally, you'd be able to point to a database, right, and look at the tables, look at the so I started exploring that idea. And these pages are generic pages, right? These pages don't know anything about trips or fish or anything. They're looking at a schema, right? They're looking at a schema, not in a database. They're implemented as a JSON object. So here it is. The only thing that is required is this JSON description of a trip. Okay, here's a trip describing the schema of trips, where you can create the various fields. Here are the fields. The fields of a trip might be the name field and the description field. And the data types, right? The names are strings. They have a label name. They have a placeholder, right? So that if I edit this, right, and I remove, the placeholder appears, right? And also a name, as in the key or how it's stored in the database as a field name. Also for description, again, would be a description. Right? Rows can determine whether something's going to be displayed as a single input field or text area, right? And I only these two. I only did these strings, but you can certainly extrapolate the possibility of having other data types such as date, numbers and whatnot, right? And then choosing how to display it in different ways depending on their data types, right? So to create our applications, we don't have to create any controllers, nothing. You should be able to just start off from a schema, right? Remember Mongoose, right? We spent a couple, some effort to describe those schemas, yes? And even describe schemas that contain other schemas and sub-schemas and how they relate to one another. That relationship, that schema should be enough to derive at least a default application, web application that would allow you to navigate the entire data structure. Okay. For instance, here you might have a relationship where you would say that there's a relationship between a trip and a fish, right? Maybe for a particular trip, I caught these many fish, right? I went to Plum Island and I caught 3 fish. I went Nantucket and I caught some other, right? So there's a relationship, there's a one-to-many relationship between trips and fish. And again, you could create a UI, a user interface that would allow you to navigate this data structure, right? For instance, you might say that the user interface might be that if you click on a particular trip, then that trip will have an ID, right? The trip will have an ID. We'll navigate to the lists of the fishes that are the children of the parent trip, right? Because the fish might have either a foreign key back to its parent, right? A foreign key, or if you're using MongoDB, perhaps the trip has an array of fish, right? Right. In either case, you have a one-to-many relationship. So if we can build a generic web application that takes as argument the description and the schema of a data model, right? It could generate this UI. Okay. So for instance, I define this trip here, right? And I describe all the fields and their data types, and then I went and did the same thing with fish, right? I did the same thing with fish. Look at my application, right? The only thing that I need to do here is, as a parameter, I can enter that entity, right? I can say fish, right? Okay, there it is. List of fish. I don't have any, but notice that I have the same fields. Let me add a couple more fields. Let's see. I can go back here and fish. I can say that fields. I can weight. Okay. I'll keep the same type. Let me copy a couple things here. Label is weight. A placeholder is 1 pound. Name is weight. And then when I come here, okay, it's not listening. I need to restart the server. Also, I have here configurations, right? I can configure, right? So this is like a meta description of my application, right, in a JSON object, and it configures how the application should behave, right? I can say that for the different views, right? So I have 3 views, right? One that lists all of them, one that lists allows me to create new, one that allows me to create edit. I can have this data-driven description of the application, and it will behave differently as I configure it. So, for instance, I can say that for the list, the weight attribute, right? I also want to include it in my edit view, right? In my edit view, you can say, right, say weight. And if I restart and I reload, restart, it doesn't work. Wait a minute, did I miss something? Wait. Restart. fields, wait, true, wait. Okay, there it is, wait. Okay. If I say add, right, this is a completely different form, right? It's a form that is dynamically generated from the schema representation of the of this entity, right? Wait, why is it showing first? It should. In the new, I forget if I fixed it for new. Let me see if I did. You restart. No, apparently I didn't. I should be able to configure also the order in which they appear. So I wanted to share with you this implementation using EJS, right? Which is creating a meta description of an application that can be then read in, right? And so it's an application of applications, right? It can build applications, generic application, data-driven applications, based on the description of the configuration of the application, right? You can, for instance, turn on and off the fact that you can edit. If I do create a new one, tuna, big fish. Okay. Notice that I have the capability of removing or editing by turning on and off configurations here. So, for instance, I can say, "Is it deletable?" It's true, right? If I say no, right, and I restart, it's not deletable anymore, right? So it's all configurable. You can imagine this having a separate application that allows you to edit the property sheets, right? And show you a preview of what the application would look like. And then when you want to run it, you just hand out this URL to someone to use it, and the application is live, right, for somebody to be able to use it for real. Okay. All right. So let me show you. Okay, if edit works. Create. Okay, so create. I must not have implemented. So notice that edit. When I go to edit, notice that the order in which they appear, it's the order that they happen in this array, right? So if I change the order here, you can imagine that this, a UI that allows you to drag and drop, right, and change the location of these fields. Why are you not working? Can I restart? Oh, this is list. I'm sorry, list. Yeah, I put a wait at the end. See that? So that worked. And for the edit, if I move it last, will it work? Restart. There it is. Wait goes at the bottom, right? So I can change the layout of the application using an editor that modifies the entry into that JSON file. Okay. Notice that the layout is very consistent. You have a back button that allows you to go back. You have OK to go back. That inserts and goes back. Edit that navigates to the edit page. Okay, so if we wanted to implement this relationship, right? There would be an additional back button here, right? That would allow you to navigate to the parent, right? So for instance, if you're at the parent trip, right, and you navigate to a particular fish that you caught at that trip, right? You like to be able to navigate back, right, to the parent, right, and then perhaps choose another fish, right, and go down to another fish, and again you can go back and to the parent trip. Okay, so let me show you the implementation. It's all using EJS. Okay, so there's no Angular here whatsoever, right? It's all driven by using EJS. All right. First, I started with the three basic pages that I'm going to need. One for listing, right? One for listing all the data, right? One for being able to create new entries, and one for being able to edit existing entries. Okay, but these need to be generic, right? Because they don't know what the fields are, they don't know what the labels are, right? It's all going to be driven from this JSON object that configures the application. It's all data driven. None of this, nothing in here is hard coded. Right? Nowhere will you see actually, fish and trips and whatnot, or any of those fields. Okay. All right, so let's see. We have that, and also, also I have ideally what they would be able to do is graphically drag and drop class diagrams, right? And drag and drop connection between the class diagrams and say that there's a one-to-many relationship between a parent and a child, right? Between various classes, and create these relationships. And after having created this class diagram graphically, they press a button and send an application, right? And that's the extent of web development, right? There's nothing else to do, right? Ideally, now we're all out of a job. It says, oh, how easy that is that, right? So now business analysts, right, folks that are not developers, if you understand how UML works, and you should be able to create these data-driven applications. Okay, so here's my mock data. So this is the data. This is the data that drives everything, right? First of all, there's a start here. This is that says which one of all these UML diagrams, right? Which one of all these UML classes, right? Which one is, where should I start? Where should I start? Now, notice that each one of the classes, each one of the entity descriptions, they have a parent, right? This parent is a little bit to be able to implement this hierarchical relationship, right? That you have that these fish, right, have all the same parent, right? They all have this parent. There's a hierarchical relationship here, right? But trips don't have a parent, or they might, right? We might say that the parent of a trip might be a user. So here's a user, and there's a one-to-many relationship between the user and the trip. One user creates many trips, and as the user goes through those trips, they catch a whole bunch of fish at each trip. Right? So again, there's a hierarchy there, right? Users, trips, fish. Yes, right. So in that case, then the parent of the trip would not be null, right? I would need an additional entity that describes users, right? In there, I would put your username and password and first name, last name, all those things, right? As part of that entity, and I would make here the parent equal to the user. Okay, but I wanted to use start to say, well, where should the application start? What would be the first page that the user sees? But even that I should not need, right? What I could do is derive the beginning of the application by looking at the root, right? Who in this class diagram has no parent? Who has no parent? Oh, the trip has no parent, or the user has no parent, has no foreign key. Nobody owns a user, right? So that should be the first thing, and that's typically what all applications do, because that's the roots of the application. I need first to identify who you are, right, or create entries into those users, because users are then define the relationships downstream. Correct, right? So I could derive this by looking at which one of these entities has no parent. In this case, trip has no parent, right? So that should be an implied beginning of the application, right? But nevertheless, I added an explicit start, that explicitly says where should the application start. Okay, make sense? All right, so let's look at the app.js. So app.js looks at this is the beginning, right? And notice that all the URLs for the incoming requests, right? They're all are under the UML namespace, right? Meaning my application lives under the /UML, right? This would be presumably an editor that would allow you to create these applications and then run them and execute them. Right now, I only focus on the execution of the program. I didn't explore what the IDE and the user interface might look like to create these applications, right? Instead, I looked at the resulting JSON, right? The resulting JSON that would describe the application, right? We would need to create an editor that would create that JSON file. Yes. So let's look at the execution. So if you type /UML start, I'm sorry, if you type just UML, just like that, it starts at trips. You see that? Right? And the way that works is that UML is handled by start. So let's look at start, the function start. So the function start, well, first of all, we load the data. There it is. That's the data that is in my mock JSON, this JSON here. And what start does, it takes a look at the data and looks at the start attribute. See that? The start attribute. And that start attribute happens to be trip. So now it knows that that's where I should start, right? That's where it should begin. So what it does is that it redirects to UML / the entity name, right? Notice when I say UML, it navigates to /trip. See that? /trip. And that's because we have this trip, right? And it uses it to redirect to UML entity. You see that? All right, so there's an event handler for that entity name, which is up here. There it is, UML entity. UML entity goes to the all page, right? The page that lists everything, right? The first page over here, right? Remember, there's 3 types of pages. Right? If you tell me here, right, /UML / and the entity name, which might be trip or user or fish or whatever, and to list all the instances, right, of the trip, because you didn't specify which, right? This one instead, these over here, right? I'm going to map them instead to different URLs. For instance, I'm going to map entity new. I'm going to map that to a page that allows me to create brand new instances. So trip and then new, that would send me over to this page, right? That allows me to create brand new entities. Or if instead you provide the ID, so some ID 123 /edit, right? I'm going to interpret that as you wanted to edit an existing entity, right? An existing record. Okay. So those are my 3 URLs, right, that allow me to navigate between the 3 pages based on a generic entity name. Right? See that? It's an entity. What is it? I don't know. It's a user. It's a fish. It's a trip. It's my movie, right? It's my songs, my CDs, my whatever. It's my object, my domain object, right? Whatever domain object I might care to implement. It's an application that creates applications. It's a generic application that allows you to interact with all sorts of entities. Okay. All right, so let's look at these. So list all page controller is down here. So the task of this list page, is to take a look at this name of the entity, take a look at that, and say, okay, well, I'm supposed to list all the instances of this collection, right? So I'm going to go to the database. I'm going to take that name, right, of that entity, and I'm going to look it up in the MongoDB database to see if it's there, right? I've noticed that I'm not going to use Mongoose because we are using a very unrestricted schema. I have no idea what the schema of this is. Change from 1 minute to the other, right? So I can't use a structured, predefined schema from Mongoose, right? Instead, I'm going to use Mongo.js, right, to be able to, on the fly, right, create these collections, right, and look them up, and then insert unrestricted, right? So one of the first things that I do is from the parameter, right, from the URL parameter, in that mock data, right? In that mock data, it's this one right here. I have trip. I use that as an entry point into this map, and retrieve this entire object right here. I retrieve this entire object right here, which is the entire description of this particular object, right? This particular entity. It's the entire schema. There it is. I have the entity object. I have the entity object. To the list EJS page, right, so that it can render the tables, right? It knows what to render and as a header, right? And it knows what fields I want to display. Also, I'm going to use Mongo.js, right, to use the entity name as a collection name, as the name of the collection, and see, is there a collection with that name? If I have it, I do a find. So someone was asking me about doing finds. Yeah, so you do something. In Mongo.js, you only have this version. In Mongo.js, you have just this version where it's a callback. You have to provide a callback, right? In Mongo.js, you have a more modern version, which you can return this as a promise, right? So that the service can then register a callback for callback, right? This one is using an older syntax, which you have to provide a callback, and here it is. This is a callback, right? But Mongoose also has this syntax, if you prefer. Anyway, I retrieve the collection. I do a find. Find is says, find me everything. Find me all the records, right? I'm not providing a predicate, but that means that I want all the records in that collection. That is going to come of all the elements in that collection. I put that list and I put the entity object, both of them, in a map, right? In a data map that I'm going to pass to my page for rendering, right? I'm going to pass all this data to the page. Which page? The list page, right here. The list page is going to take that. It's going to use the entity object because it's going to use it so that it can display all the fields, right? The name field, the description field, right? As a header for the headers, right? But it doesn't have data, right? This schema doesn't have data. The data instead is going to be in the docs, right? In the documents that come back from the database, right? Those are the records that come back from the database. So in my list page, there it is, my list page. Okay. I create a header. And it says list of what? List of the name of whatever the entity is, right? Pluralized, right? And I'm not being very fancy about how to pluralize stuff, but I realized that I then thought about it and realized that fishes is not the plural of fish. So we need to be a little more sophisticated. The plural. Label, right? I grab the label from the mock, right? So here's trip. I take the label. Here's the label, trip, and for fish, the label is just fish, right? That's the label, and I just pluralize it, right? But we could be more smarter about that, right? Anyway, here's where I add the S at the end, right? Anyway, so right after that, I have my link to be able to create new instances, right? This would it's a hyperlink that would take me to this page, to the new page, right? But let's wait on that. All right, let's wait on that. So this is the plus, right? This is the plus that is displayed here on the right-hand side. Below that, it checks to see, are there docs, right? Are there any records in that query that you just passed me? If there are no records, I'm not even going to bother rendering anything, okay? So notice that there's an if statement that is around everything, right? I'm going to use a table, I'm going to iterate, and I'm going to create a row for each one of the records, yes? Right? But first I check to see, are there any records? If there are no records, I'm not going to render anything. If there are, I'm going to use a table head, I'm going to use a regular bootstrap table, and I'm going to iterate for the head. For the head, I need to create these headings at the top, right? These headings. And those headings are going to be based on the name of the fields, right? So I'm going to iterate over the fields. So basically looking at this. So here's I have a section, right? A section where you can configure your displays, right? Maybe you have 20 fields, right? Each record has 20 fields, but maybe you don't want to display all of them, right? Okay, if you're going to list maybe the tabular format, maybe you only want to display, if you have users and those users have first name, last names, and phones and emails and URLs and handles on Twitter, and they have tons of stuff on that record. Perhaps the only thing that you want to display, perhaps even on a phone, maybe it's just the first name and last name. That's what you want to display. Right? So even though you have that much information per record, you might only want to display just a subset of those fields. So to do that, I have here a section, right? For each one of my entities, I have a section where you can configure views, right? And there are basically 3 views, right? The list view, where you can list all the records, the edit view, and the new, right, for creating brand new records. Yes, and here I can configure them. For instance, one of the things that I don't want to create, for instance, I don't want to create the IDs. So that's certainly not a field that I care about, right? Or that I should be able to create or even edit, right? So I don't want to display that. So here in my views, I can configure the various views of the list view. I can configure the edit view or the new view, right? And say that, for instance, for my trip, the fields that I want to display are name and description in that order, right? This also configures in the fields, the columns. I can change them, right? Maybe I want first name, last name, or I want last name, first name, right? I want to reorder the order of the columns. So this configures that, and these map to these fields right here, name. The same. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to iterate over that. I'm going to iterate over this list, right? Of the list. Where is that? It's under trip, views, list, fields, right? So generically, it's entity, views, list, fields, right? So I'm iterating over that array. As I iterate over that array, I take the values in there, and each one of those is just field names, right? These are the names of the fields. Now that I have the names of the fields, I can go into my fields entry of my trip and
and pick out the fields that I do care about, right? I know that I want these two. I know that I want these two, name and description, and that I can then pick to know is what label should I use, right? What label should I display in the top, right? So for instance, I might decide that this is more descriptive. The label should be trip name, right? Or label should be maybe long description, right? That's what I want in the headers, for instance, right? Or maybe the label when I enter the input field, right? So if I restart that, oh, trips. There it is, trip name, long description, right? So that I can change what those labels are, right? Okay. So yeah, so once I have the name, I use that as a key into the fields attribute, and then I get the object. And I use the field object so I can retrieve the actual label that you want to display. Okay. So there's a lot of referencing and dereferencing, right? Notice that most of my object is a map. You see that? It's one huge map. You see that? I barely use any arrays, right? But everything else is just objects everywhere. See that? Objects everywhere. Okay. I only arrays when I have just when there's no need for describing or the actual values in that collection. Okay. Anyway, so right. So once I so this over here is rendering the first row of the header. Well, the header can have typically has just one row, but you can have more. This is rendering the very first set of headers on the row, and then I ask, is it deletable? Are these records deletable, or are they editable? If they are, I'm going to add an additional column. Right? I'm going to have an additional column so that I can add the buttons to delete or the buttons to edit. Right? So I add that. Right? So and that's the whole head. That's the head. Then for the body, I'm going to iterate over the documents. Right? All the collection of documents that came back from the query. And as I extract each document from the collection, and again, I'm gonna use my configuration of the fields. I'm gonna use this again. Because the columns have to be in the right order. So if I iterate it over this array and display the columns, I need to display the same columns right in the right order from the document. The document itself has the document itself is a map, right? The document itself is an object. It's a JSON object, right? So I can use the field names as keys into that map, right? And extract the actual values from that map. So once I just render it in a TD, right? And that fills out the TDs horizontally, right? Then I need to know if I need to add that extra column with X or the pencil, right? So that I can make them editable or deletable. I ask myself, okay, should I add this additional TD? Well, it depends. Is it editable? Is it deletable? Right? If it is, then I will add the new TD, right? But then I will only display the edit or the delete button depending on whether they're editable or not, right? So if it's editable, I add a hyperlink, right? That with the pencil. If it's deletable, I add a hyperlink with a remove with an X. Okay. And that's it. That's it. Okay. Let me just show you one of these where you can delete, right? So to delete, notice that I have here a hyperlink that you're gonna click on that, and notice this is gonna generate a get, right? This is gonna generate a get because that's all you can really generate from a browser, right? without JavaScript, that's all really you can generate, either a get or a post, right? Only those two things you can generate from folks interacting with the hyperlinks or interacting with a form. Those are the only two things you can generate, right? So even though we're deleting, we're not using HTTP delete, right? Like we did when we were using AngularJS, right? We typically would say http.post.get.put.delete, right? Here, we don't have that. The user is going to click on a hyperlink, and that generates a get. So to delete, the user generates this, clicks on this, and we're passing in that URL is going to be a get, and it starts with the UML, followed by the name of the entity, followed by the ID, meaning a particular record, right? I'm trying to delete that particular record, and I put a delete. You see that? Right? The reason I put a delete there is that this URL pattern, right? It's kind of going to be a little bit overloaded, right? I'm going to have several get requests with that same URL pattern, right? So the server is not going to be able to distinguish whether I want to edit, I want to delete, I want to insert, because we don't have so the browser is not going to be able to distinguish them. So the only way that we can distinguish it, just having get, is by adding at the end, right, an additional discriminator, right, by which the server can then determine whether it's a delete or not. Okay, so it's a delete. Let me show you about the delete. If it is a delete, the server is going to be listening for that. There it is. There's the delete. See that? Right, there's the delete comes in. That's a URL pattern. It's a unique pattern, right? So entity ID delete, and it will call the function, the local function for update. For delete. Sorry, for remove. There it is. For remove, right? Again, I'm going to parse out the name of the entity. I'm going to parse out the ID of the record that I'm trying to remove. I'm going to use MongoJS to retrieve that particular entity, right, as a collection, and I'm going to do a dot remove, right? Dot remove. For this, I will need a filter and say I will remove this particular record, not all the records, just this one record. I need to remember that the ID, I need to wrap it inside of an instance of a MongoJS object ID, right? This is not as friendly as Mongoose, right? In Mongoose, you can just use plain strings, right? And it'll interpret it and correctly, it'll wrap it itself under object ID. But over here, we have to do it explicitly ourselves, right? MongoJS object ID. So that removes it. And it comes back with this callback. And where do we go? We redirect. We're going to go back to the list of all the entities, right? Remember so we start here, right? We remove X, and basically we reload the page. So we are server, and the server redirects us right where we are, right? So it looks like it's removed, right? And the entire document, is refreshed, and you get the same functionality as in Angular, right? When you were removing elements from a collection, right? But with the difference that here, the entire page is re-rendered, right? That's the difference. When we're using when we're using the same document, it didn't refresh. Only that part of the DOM was manipulated, right? Removed from the DOM. The model changed, right? But the most of the page, 99% of the page was untouched. Over here, the whole page is thrown away. The whole page is then re-rendered from scratch, right? That's what I meant earlier about being a little bit less efficient in that sense, right? Okay. All right, so remove. What about creating brand new instances? Right, so let's create a brand new instance. To create a brand new instance, we have this hyperlink way at the top with the plus sign, right? And notice that the URL is properly has a proper pattern, right, where we specify the name of the entity, right, that's going to map to the collection that we're going to create a new record in, and /new, right? So that is going to be sent over when the user directed to this over here, right here, entity new. See that, right? And in there, we're going to have a handler, right, a create page handler that is going to take the name of the name of the entity, is going to retrieve the object, right, and is going to render the going to allow us to enter new instances into the database, right? It's going to render a form, right, with labels and fields and labels and fields and labels and fields, right? That is going to allow us to enter the data, right? But for that, notice that we're passing, as part of the data map that we're passing to the page, we're passing the entity object, right? It's again, it's retrieving, it's going into the mock data, right, and retrieving object, this whole thing, this whole object, right? Because we don't need it. We're going to need it, right? Because we're going to need to look at the fields. We're going to need to iterate over the fields, right? Because we need to render them and provide and create a form for the user. Okay. All right. So let's go look at new. So new is right here, and new is going to create for us a form. There it is, a form, meaning that the user is intended to this form, intended to fill out the form, and they submit it. The URL will be posted to the server. The server is going to retrieve and extract the information from the post, right? And look up the collection that it needs, right, to then insert that data into the database, into the collection, right? The action, notice the action. It is a post. Remember, the only two things that we clicking URLs, right? Or post by submitting forms. Those are the only two HTTP actions that the user can generate. So to generate this post, notice being posted to UML entity, right? It's almost a little RESTful, right? /UML, and you're posting, right, and creating this the name of that entity. Then under there we have an H1 that allows us to abort. Right, you have a hyperlink here that allows us to go back and say, no, I don't want to insert anything. This just goes back and generates an HTTP GET, right? UML and then the entity, so it goes back to the list. It goes back to the list. So this is a left, so it goes back to the left. Then it displays the entity name, and then a button that's going to allow us to submit. Right, submit this link, this form, right? So it's this one over here, right? It's going to say plus. It's this page right here. Oops, what's going on? Oh, there it is. It's this page over here, right? So you have this button on the right-hand side that allows us to submit. Okay. Right, and the form is the entire form, right? So per field in the object, right? One per field here. So we have the fields here. You have name and description. So one input field for each one, right? One thing that I might add here to configure these fields is whether I want to make them editable or not. Maybe I don't want them to be editable, right? Perhaps, like for instance, the _ID, right? That's a field that I don't want to be able to edit, right? Or maybe some fields should be read-only, right? Or some fields should be calculated based on some other fields, right? So we can become much more sophisticated and be able to configure this. Maybe some fields should have a format, Maybe it's a phone number, right? And I like to be able to put a mask somehow that it formats as a phone, right? As I type, to provide formatting in a date, right? Whether I want military date or European date, right? Or US date, right? Also, options, right? Options could be configured as drop downs or as radio buttons, right? Or you know, I could choose different ways of configuring these things, right? But for now, I only did strings, right? I only had time to do strings. So here, I'm going to iterate over the fields, right? I'm going to iterate over the. It's a map. Look at that. Fields is a map. It's an object. See that? It's not an array. It's not an array, right? It's a map. Iterate over that map. So this name, that name, are these keys. These keys right here, the keys of the map, right? Okay, so I'm iterating over a map, right? And these are the keys. This is the map. And you can retrieve the actual object, the value. So this key, one of them from here, entity.fields, use name as a key, right? And that returns the actual object in that map. Now that I have that particular object, right? I render first in a div, in a dedicated div, I render the label. So I render for name, I'm gonna render this label trip name, and for description, I'm gonna render long description. That's the label I'm gonna display, and that's exactly what we have here. See, trip name and long description. See that, right? And below that, below each one of those labels, I'm going to render the one of several input fields, right? And again, here, this could be much more sophisticated. Right now, it's just text areas and input fields, but certainly much more interesting than that. So first of all, I check to see, is the field type string, right? Is it a string? If it is a string, so that's looking at what? It's looking at this type, right? It's looking at this type right here. Okay. If it is a string, then okay. Well, how many rows of strings? Is it more than one, or is it just one? Next area. Notice that it needs to have a name. It needs to have a name. This is how when you submit a form, right? It creates a map that contains the field names, right? And the values. It creates a map of name-value pairs, name-value, name-value, name-value. The name it comes from this name right here, this name attribute in the input field. Okay. I use rows to configure the height of the text area. Okay. Right. Notice that text area is right here. It's right after the closing of this tag over here. See that? Right. The reason is that if I do an entry like this, a new line, you know, re-render, there'll be some text there. See that, the white space there? See white space? The white space is there because it considers all the white space between these two pointy brackets as actual characters, right, of the value of that text area. But I don't want that, so I put the text here right abutting the pointy brackets. So if it's one, I just render an input field. The name is also field name, and the placeholder. And that's it. So this is it's a generic page, right, that can render basically, you know, any form based on the schema of whatever objects you might have. So let's submit this. When you submit this, how do you spell Nantucket? When I submit it, I notice that it comes back to here, but it goes back to the list of the trips, but not before it inserts the data into the database, right? It has to happen in that order. First we need to insert, right, and then we need to navigate and load the information from the database to display this, right? So to do that, the form gets entity name. So let's go to the server, and in the server, right, we should be listening for that incoming post. There it is. The post UML and the entity name, right, is going to be handled by the create. In the create, right, we fetch the name of the entity from the parameter. The entity object, I don't know that I need it. Do I need the entity object? I don't believe I need it. I think I can just remove that. Once I have the entity name, I either create the collection, right, if it's not there. Otherwise, I grab the collection if it's already there. And I'm going to insert into that collection the fields that are in the body, right? So they submit it. Body, right, of the HTTP request, right? So once I have the body, I can insert it, and if it's successful, right, I'm going to redirect and go back to the page that just lists everything. Okay, I guess this should be, this should have an if, right, if there's an error or not, and display an error. Nevertheless, it goes back and lists everything. Okay, how about editing? So it goes back to lists right here, this list. All right, so we talked about creating a new record. What about editing an existing record? So to edit an existing record, we have hyperlinks for that, right? Remember that we can configure something to be editable or deletable. If it's deletable, we'll add the X, and we already looked at that, I believe, right? If we want to edit something, we're going to generate a hyperlink that allows us to navigate, right? Generates this GET request where we encode the name of the entity, the ID of the record that we want to edit, and then we discriminate with this edit at the end, right? So that we have this edit over here, right? There it is, edit. Right, so this is being handled by this controller, and in that controller we retrieve the entity name. We retrieve the ID because notice we're editing one particular record, so we need to know exactly what record you're editing. We grab the collection if it already exists from the entity name. We find that one record, right, by ID, because we have the ID. Once we find that document, we package it along with the entity object. We package it in a map that we can then pass along to the page, the edit page, right? So that the page can display the already existing values, right? Display the already existing values so that you can then edit it, right? So just like this, right? If I click on edit, notice that the form is pre-populated, right? It's pre-populated with the values of that already were in the database. Okay. So in the edit page is very similar to the new page, right? It's very, very similar. The only difference is that we need to make sure that the values are pre-populated. That's the only difference, right? Same thing. We're going to iterate over all the fields, right? We're going to iterate over and display all the labels and the text. The type of the field and also how many rows there are, right? So the only difference here is that I want to point out is that when I'm rendering the text area and when I'm rendering the input field, there is an added attribute that I added. It's this one, value. See that? Value. Meaning I am going to pre-populate the input field with the value that is already, right, was submitted. Okay, For the text area, it's a little bit different. In the text area, you can't use the value attribute. You can't use the value attribute. You have to instead inline it. You have to inline it inside of the opening and closing text area. See that? So just a little bit different. Just wanted to point that out. Okay. And so let's see what else. I think we did everything, right? So when you submit and you say okay, right, and you make it a little bit different, right? You change it. You say okay, right? If we say okay, it gets updated, and the way it's updated is that there's a button at the top that submits the form, right? And it goes to where? It goes to this action right here, right? UML entity doc and then update, right? And that's handled on the server by this update right here, which it's handled by this update event handler, which takes out the name of the entity, grabs the entity from the input from the URL pattern, retrieves the ID, removes the ID, right? Because MongoJS doesn't like it when you try to update an ID, right? Because those are primary keys, right? You're not supposed to be able to update those primary keys. So I remove it from the incoming submission, right? And then I use the update method on MongoJS, right? I find that one document with that ID, and I set the new value of the document to be whatever the form was submitted, right? Once it's updated, it just goes back to the first page, which just lists all the entity in a tabular format. Make sense? Right? So yeah, so it's a generic application that can render any application based on a schema, right? This should allow you to allow me to implement for non-developers, they could graphically create their applications and do some configurations on how they want to render this, right? How they want to format it and style it, right? And have software developers out of a job. I mean, that's our job, right? To work our way out of a job, right? That's what developers. Lazy people, right? They don't want to do things manually, so they're always looking to automate. They do it once, says I don't want to ever do this again, so they write a program that does it for them. Right? That's the perfect developer, right? Very lazy, don't want to do anything manually. There's an article, really good article about how technology has our performance, right? And it says, well, if you want to dig a hole, then you get a shovel and you dig a hole. If you want to dig many holes, right, well, then you get a bulldozer, right? And so there's things that allow you to multiply your mechanical and your physical strength. Same thing mentally, right? If you want to win a particular chess game, then well, you get better at it and you practice and then you try to be better than your partner. But if you want to beat thousands of people, then there's no way for me to play that many people. So I write a program that plays chess, so then beats those folks. And I write such a good game that piece of software that I can't beat it, right? And so how could that be, right? How could I write something that is better than me? I mean, I wrote it, right? This goes to speaks to a little bit our ability of abstraction, of creating abstractions, where at some point we are completely unaware of the details, right? We don't really know what the piece of software is doing, even though we wrote it, right? So complex and it's so buried in so many layers of abstraction that it goes beyond our own understanding, right? And that's and you can see that through history how things have become
just buried or layered. Think about our food, and we don't think about all sorts of things that are just beyond our interest, or even when we drive, we don't really care what's behind the car. Well, some of us. It's just if you give me a steering wheel and a stick shift and a couple pedals, I can drive anything, right? Abstraction. We are abstraction animals. All right, so that's EJS. A couple more things that I wanted to just share with you. Client-side programming, is it here? Oh yeah, so for your assignments, you might, I believe one of the assignments asks you to sort, right? Sort the usernames, right? So that by clicking on the titles, right, and sort it backwards and forwards, right? To do that, ng-repeat has an order by filter, right? That you can give it the collection, and typically these collections are collections of objects, right? The objects have fields. So order by allows you to choose what field you want to order by, right? So this, you could say, order by. So this is the regular, iterate over records in a data in a piece of data collection, right? And then you can say order by, and then the field that you want to sort by, okay? And just by providing this field, it resorts the entire array using that particular field. And that field can also be a variable. So you can change that as a variable. It says, oh, now I want to sort by first name, now by last name, whatever, right? You can inject it into that variable. The last attribute here allows you to go forwards and backwards, right? So if it's right, but if you turn it on, say true, that's reverse. Meaning, do I want to reverse this, right? So and this also could be a variable. A variable that you can toggle, true, false, right? That will sort and resort the collection inside of the ng-repeat. I wanted to share that. We talked about text angular. In the data model, so pattern schemas. Right, so we've been using several data models, right? That we have a data model for the user, data model for the form, for the fields, for your projects, right? You probably have a whole bunch of data models, right? And typically we have been instantiating them in the app.js, yes? Right? But we found that oftentimes we have dependencies between data models, right? A data model that might need another data model. Like for instance, the field data model might need the forms data model, right? So instead of having these one-off data models just going around loosely, it's a good practice to encapsulate all the data models into a larger, just one big model module, right? Where there's one place where all data. So and then once you have this singleton instance, you can then pass it around to anybody, right? And you can always retrieve the data model from this one entry point, right? So here's an example where we have collected the various data access data models into one single module and exported it so that everyone else can use it. You can then take this model and just pass it around to any service or anybody who needs it. Okay. Here we encapsulated MongoJS, Mongoose, right? We connected to the database, so everything is in here. Okay. So no longer do you need to pass around Mongoose and MongoJS and things. Just one single place, and then you pass around this one single instance to everybody. Okay. In here we're creating a map. We create a map where we require all the other models, right, and have them mapped into this one map that we can then share with the rest of the world as a single place of entry and access to anything we might need data-wise. Okay. Also, from last week, I don't know if you remember,
the schema. For the widgets, I had an array, and that array included the little set of objects, several set of objects in here, and it was just I thought it was very poorly implemented. So instead, what I did is I collected all those schemas, right? I collected all those schemas and put them all inside of a widget schema, right? I created dedicated schemas for each one of them, right? For the inputs, text input schemas, the repeater schemas, the data tables, the YouTube, the HTML schemas, all of them, right, are now full-blown schemas as opposed to little JSON objects, right? This is so much cleaner. So I just wanted to share with you this. Oh yeah, when you remove things from MongoJS, that you need to include MongoJS.objectID. Okay, MongoJS is not as nice as MongoJS, right? That just you can just pass it a string. That you need to use this object ID. Just pointing that out. Boolean. So Boolean is very useful as a data type, right? Especially if you're storing 1-bit information, such as, for instance, whether it's editable or deletable, or you're working with checkboxes or radio buttons, right? AngularJS already understands that if a checkbox is bound to something of type Boolean, right, it knows that it needs to either render checked or unchecked, right, or the radio filled or not filled, right? It's smart enough to understand Booleans and render the views appropriately using the correct data model. And you repeat, we did that already. Text Angular, okay. Database. Dynamic story page. Okay, we already looked at all the dynamic story pages. And one last thing is, you notice I improved my little portal here so that if I click on the title, right, it takes up the entire window, right? It's almost like a slide, right? So that it makes it easier for me to present, right? And notice that it's and when you click on the header again, it just goes back, right? It kind of like expands, so it makes it easier for me to teach. And I implemented that. I implemented it using a directive, right? And some of you had asked me, yeah, can you go over about directives again, right? Because I'd like to implement a couple of them for the project. So let me go over this directive real quick. It's very simple. If you look at the HTML behind this, okay, it's just these are all divs. These are all divs. That's that div, and what I did is just I applied this JGA-slide. See that? JGA-slide. That's all you need to do, right? You apply this to it, and now it makes all the H3s, H2s, H4s clickable, right? And if you click it, right? I thought maybe a better implementation might be to add a dedicated button on the right-hand side, but anyway, I thought to do it without having to go back and add any HTML, right? Just add this this attribute. Either I configure it so it could be either an attribute, right, or it could be a class. So you can apply it as a class. You can say class JGA-slide or an attribute like this, or it could be instead of a div, it could be the tag's name could be JGA. Be implemented as a tag, as an attribute, or as a class. Right, so let me show you the implementation. So the implementation is right here. So inside of JGA directives, so inside of my directives directory, I created a file called JGA directives, and that's where I'm going to put all my directives, my sort, my sortable, right? All my directives are going to live here in this one module called JGA directives. And the way it works, it's very simple, right? it takes the it declares a brand new module, right? That's for this to be a brand new module, you need to put the square brackets right after it, and then it declares all the directives. So right now I only have one directive, right? But I could declare several directives under this one file. So this directives will map to this piece of text, right? JGA dash slide. So the naming convention is that you use camel casing when you declare it, right? It's lowercase. It starts with a lowercase, and then you camel case. Right? It maps to HTML. In the HTML side, maps to that every capital letter will be replaced by a dash lowercase. Okay, and the reason is that HTML is unaware of casing. You know, HTML doesn't care about a case, right? But here in JavaScript, we do have case sensitivity, right? So the naming convention is based on that. All right. So this is how it's in HTML. And this is how it's declared in JavaScript. Obviously, this JavaScript needs to be loaded into your index, right? It's a new module that needs to be loaded, and because it's a new module, your module, this one, no, not that one. Which one is it? Server, portal. Your app needs to declare that other module. It needs to declare that other module as a dependency, right? So your module needs to declare that other module as a dependency. I depend on that. So once you depend on that, all those directives are now available in this and available. So wherever you put that JGA dash slide on the HTML, it will invoke this this function right here. And what does it do? Here's a declaration. The declaration of the directive is through a configuration object. You need to configure an object, a JSON object, and then you return that object, right? And that's how it takes that object and then it implements that behavior. The behavior that I'm configuring is that here I'm saying that my directive can be applied as a class. It can be applied as an element or as an attribute, right? Or I can just choose to be just one of them, right? I can say just as an element, right? By default, I believe it's element and class by default, right? But you can also implement this as an attribute as well. Anyway, the other thing that I figure here is a function that will allow you to interact directly with the DOM, right? It will give you direct access to the DOM elements, right, of that div or whatever's inside using jQuery. They're using low-level DOM manipulation, right? To do that, you have to configure the attribute link, and that attribute you need to provide a function that will be invoked, and it will pass you a reference to the DOM, right? It'll pass you, says, so here it is. Here's the DOM for you. Do whatever you want with the DOM. Low-level DOM manipulation, right? It's your responsibility. Now you can do whatever you want with the DOM. It passes you a scope. Scope is any variables, any scope, any root scopes that were declared outside of the attribute. Right? If there's any controllers outside or anything other, right? Anything that has been declared will be available through the scope. And if you're applying this in an element, right, an HTML element, there might be other attributes, right? You can map them here so you can have access to configuration attributes in the element. But the most interesting thing is this element. element is the DOM element. It passes it to you, right? It's not a raw DOM element. It has already gone through some manipulation, right? It's a wrapped object. It's wrapped using JQLite. JQLite is a light version of jQuery, meaning you can do most everything that you can do with jQuery, but it's a reduced functional set, right? And so, for instance, you can add things, you can change classes, you can do some CSS stuff, you can, but you don't have sortable, you don't have any of that, right? To do that, you would need to wrap it. Here, what I did is I said, okay, grab that element, find me all the H2s, H3s, and H4s under that element, and make them clickable, so that if someone clicks on them, if anybody clicks those headers, invoke the toggle function. Invoke the toggle function, which I implemented up here. The toggle function, right, only in this namespace, grabs this, right, this, the keyword this is mapped to whoever generated the event. Right? In this instance, this is mapped to whoever generated the event. Who generated the events? The H2s, the H3s, the H4s, whatever H2 was clicked. Okay. Now the way I am using these headers, the way I'm using them, I'm writing the HTML. I know the structure of my HTML. I know that they are the immediate children of the div that I want to make a slide of. Right? I know that those are it. So what I do is that I grab that H2, H3, H4 that was clicked. Okay, I fetch its div that I want to make a slide out of. Right now I have the element. I now have the element, and then I ask myself, okay, has this slide been expanded already? Because remember, I want to toggle it between expanded and unexpanded. The way I do that is I ask, does it have a class expanded? Does it have a class expanded? So remove a class, right? And you can query, does it have that class, right? So here I ask, if it doesn't have a class, if it does not have the class expanded, right, then do this, right? Meaning, if it hasn't been expanded already, tag it with expanded. You know, add the class expanded because I'm about to expand it, right? I'm about to explode it, right? So to expand it, from the normal flow of the document, right? I'm going to remove it from the normal flow. Right, to do that, I change its position and I make it fixed, meaning I don't want you to scroll with the rest of the document. Right? I just want you to be static. I don't want you to go anywhere. And I'm going to fix you to the top and the left 0. So I'm going to push it to the top and left. I'm going to change your width and height. Change width and I am completely to the bottom, looking over the entire screen. I put your Z index above anybody else, right? So you're on top of everything else. I change your background to white because by default it's transparent. I will be able to see right through it. I change it transparent to white. I add some padding around because it was flush with the side with the ends. I double the font. Right, so that it becomes bigger, right, so I can see it much better. If it doesn't have if it does have already the expanded class, I'm going to remove it. That's how I'm toggling, right? That's how I toggle. I know that it's there or I know it's not there. And I changed all these CSS back to the way they were originally. So it goes back to being part of the content, and it has that behavior, right, of becoming big and small, right? And so it's a nice tool now as a teaching tool that allows me to quickly expand and collapse any content. Anyway, I think that's all I have for you. It's been a pleasure. I had a lot of fun. I think we took a look at a lot of very important technologies, client-side development, a new way of thinking about web development. I also, perhaps it was a little bit of a lofty goal that was trying to teach you things that were very common in real-life development environments, in real teams, and many of the code that we work throughout, and the way we structure the code is something that you see in real development. Places like I work as a consultant, and this is what you see in front lines. And so I wanted to share some of that experience with you. I know perhaps in small projects, perhaps it's kind of an overkill, having to break up these applications into so many layers, right, of views, controls, and models, and services. And but when you go out there and work with large teams, it's very important to keep the data, all the source code structure, so that people can start wrapping their heads around and what to expect, how things are organized. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you. All right, so I'll have office hours right afterwards if you want to come by. So even if you don't have a schedule, an appointment, please feel free to come by. I will have to give priority to those that have scheduled though. Yes.
I had sent an email earlier. I saw a couple of people getting grades or something.
Yep.
So I just wanted to check in. If I don't have up until I have up until assignment 2.
Okay.
So that's about it. So
And
I don't know.
have you been creating all your
the tags and
the
everything?
tags?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll see what's going on. Maybe you want to come by and we can take a look at it right away?
Yeah, sure.
Or? Okay.
I'll just stick around and
Okay.
go.
Let me close this up. Hi.
I want to see
Oh,
here.
yes, let's take a look at that. I'm sorry?
Looked at it briefly more, and it has the same issue with the field and